portrait of a lonely human being who doesn't know anything about himself, who has very little identity. His identity comes from what people say about him, what people write about him, and the people who take his picture, but he doesn't have any familiarity with what within him.
A picture of a person who is lost and doesn't know anything about themselves. What people say about him, what's written about him, and the pictures taken of him don't give him much of a sense of who he is. But when he looks inside, he doesn't see anything familiar. Steven Spielberg is one of the most well-known and respected movie makers of all time. He has been making great films like Jaws, E.T., and Schindler's List for more than 50 years, always pushing the limits of what films can do. At the same time, even Spielberg has had problems before. He is known for being very strict, and he expects everyone on set to be professional and respectful. He will never forget when that balance is upset. In this video, we'll talk about 6 stars that Spielberg didn't like working with and the real reasons why they broke up. Julia Roberts is first on the list. Before Spielberg, his business was built on discipline. He sees making films as more than just art. Everyone must come to the sacred cooperation ready, responsible, and exact. And actors are only there to help the story, no matter how famous they are. It seemed like a great fit when Julia Roberts, Hollywood's new golden girl after Pretty Woman, agreed to play Tinkerbell in Hook 1991. Spielberg would change the story of Peter Pan. Roberts would bring star power and the two of them would make magic. The set changed into a battlefield instead of magic though. Roberts was only in her early 20s, and was having a hard time with the rapid fame. She was in uncharted territory. Tinkerbell wanted to work with the green screen all the time, do hard technical tricks, and be away from her co-stars. Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman shared energy and chemistry on set, but Robert was playing alone, in front of tennis balls and big props. The team started to whisper on set. Julia Roberts seemed cold and distant, and the rumors got mean. Some people even called her mean names, like Tinkerhell. Time could not have been worse. Her personal life was a mess. Roberts' much talked about engagement to Kiefer Sutherland had ended, and because Hook was running late, shooting went on all the way through her wedding day. A few years later, Roberts talked about how alone she felt during that time. I was having a really hard time in my life and didn't feel like anyone was there for me. It seemed like the people I thought would support me didn't. At the same time, Steven Spielberg had to deal with rising costs and a project that was 40 days behind schedule. He could no longer hold back. He thought that Roberts' unpredictable absences made things even worse. After the fact, Spielberg was asked about the experience and said, "It was an unfortunate time for us to be working together. People who worked in Hollywood knew all they needed to know." Spielberg, who isn't known for criticizing his stars very often, never worked with Roberts again. But Roberts wouldn't be quiet. In an interview with Vanity Fair in 1999, she talked about how betrayed she felt when Spielberg didn't protect her against the Tinkerhell rumors. "Give your hand to God. There was nothing I read that was true, and it made me feel terrible. There was no way I could believe that someone I knew and trusted was hesitant to defend me. For the first time I thought I had a traitor in my group." Her words were cutting and showed not only an argument at work but also a personal wound. For Roberts, Spielberg had turned his back on her when she needed him the most. He was known for always looking out for stars. Conflicts only got worse on set. Dustin Hoffman, who was known for being a perfectionist, made scene after scene very hard. With his never-ending improvisations, Robin Williams kept everyone happy, but it made the shooting hours even longer. At the same time, Julia Roberts, who was stuck on her green screen sets, became even more alone. Steven Spielberg was constantly pushed by the studio to defend a $80 million budget that was getting out of hand. He didn't have much time for fragility, and their artistic worlds collided. The need for order in Spielberg versus the battle with chaos in Roberts. What people thought of Hook when it finally came out in theaters was mixed. It was called bloated and uneven by critics, but fans liked it just enough to make it a success at the box office. Still, Roberts and Spielberg would always be affected by it. He didn't cast her again, and the quiet was stronger than any words. As someone who was known for bringing back actors like Tom Hanks, Harrison Ford and Richard Dreyfuss, Roberts' absence from his later works was hard to ignore. In turn, she felt the pain of that event for years. She later said it was a hard lesson to learn. Even though she grew out of the mean name Tinker Hell, the story lives on in Hollywood legend. They still keep a complete business distance from each other. There was no get-together, appearance or secret project. Hook was the only project they worked together on, and both of them have since said it was one of the hardest projects of their lives. Second, Robert Shaw. Spielberg joined the Jaws crew when he was only 27 years old. He had big plans, a dream, and a story that could change thrillers forever. But he also had Robert Shaw, an actor who was both talented and unstable. Shaw was electric on TV. He gave the movie its grit and seriousness by playing Quint, the tough shark hunter. But off-screen, things were a mess. Shaw was a big drinker and very old-fashioned, so he didn't like how Spielberg tried to keep up a polished Hollywood look on set. He made fun of Richard Dreyfuss, the young newbie who played Hooper, all the time. Later, Spielberg thought it was like he was testing him. Robert was stuck in the past. He meant to make Richard aware that he thought Richard was too green. At one point, Shaw even dared Dreyfuss to do a risky stunt on a boat, even though he knew the younger character would say no. Well, Robert Shaw didn't think the jabs and fights were mean. His co-stars got tougher from them, but Steven Spielberg found it impossible to keep them in check. The tension got so bad that Spielberg called it the Great Shaw-Dreyfuss feud. Richard Dreyfuss has made the image less painful over time. Robert was tough, but I think he liked to make things more difficult. He wasn't being mean to me only. He made the movie seem more real by making us feel what the characters did. But for Spielberg, the problem was more than just people not getting along. The making of Jaws was already on the verge of failing. The robot shark, which people called Bruce, kept breaking down. Things got out of hand with the plan. As tempers rose, Shaw, who was very smart, made it harder to control the chaos. A member of the crew remembers a man who was both smart and dangerous. One day he gave the haunting USS Indianapolis speech in a single take that was so powerful that it silenced the whole set. The next thing he knew, he was drinking a lot, yelling at Dreyfuss, and getting angry at Spielberg, questioning the young director's authority. After a few years, Spielberg said, "Robert was a force of nature. He scared me just as much when he wasn't on TV." As for Shaw, he never said sorry. When asked about the stories of tension, he said, "I don't put up with fools. That's fine with me if it makes things hard." In an odd turn of events, that conflict may have been what fueled the movie. It felt real that Quint, Hooper, and Brody were so angry at each other, and in many ways it was. After making Jaws, Spielberg felt both traumatized and triumphant. He had to deal with both a broken shark prop and Shaw's rough presence. Still, Spielberg never worked with Shaw again. He looked up to him, and even called him smart, but it was clear that the experience had been scary. Shaw died in 1978, only 3 years after that. He was 51 years old. Any tension that still existed between them finished not with making up, but with silence. Spielberg still talks about Jaws as the movie that almost ended his career before it even started. He always talks about how great Shaw's performance was, but the underlying message is clear. He had some of the worst days of his life thanks to Robert Shaw, who gave him one of the best movie roles. That brings us to number 3.
Shan Young.
Shan Young. Steven Spielberg can only do so much when he is being polite. Those limits were put to the test with Young. In the early 1980s, Shan Young looked like she was going to be a big star. After getting her stripes, she was quickly becoming a well-known figure in Blade Runner. Almost everyone who saw her screen tests for Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark thought she was great. Young says she was flown to California twice for callbacks and came back sure that Spielberg wanted her to play Marion Ravenwood in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Even though Karen Allen got the part in the end, Young wouldn't let it go. She talked to Spielberg directly at a party in the Hollywood Hills on New Year's Eve. "You led me astray. I believed I would get the part," Spielberg replied. "I did not mislead you." He was usually calm. "I did not." His response, which was clearly hurtful, caught Young off guard. She remembered trying to calm things down later.
Oh,
"Calm down. I didn't mean that you were bad or anything. I was sure I was going to get the part. Even though you flew me back twice, the damage was already done." Being accused of lying in public was absolutely unacceptable for a director who put honesty and loyalty above all else. And Spielberg didn't think it was just a mistake. It was a sign of danger. Soon a rumor spread that Spielberg thought Young was risky and even broke the rules by telling the press about production details. His typically controlled sets clashed with hers, and trust between them broke down. One person who knew her said, "She was good, but Steven didn't trust her." For Young, being turned down meant more than just losing a part. It felt close to home. In an interview with the Daily Beast years later, she let out all of her anger. "Steven has the power to stop you. It was him who scared Megan Fox and me." She went even further and said that Spielberg, Ridley Scott and Warren Beatty were the directors who ruined her career by calling her tough. Steven Spielberg has never made a public attack on Young. He wasn't like that, but his silence said a lot. After what they said to each other, he never cast her again. Tom Hanks, Richard Dreyfuss and Harrison Ford are just a few of the directors who have been known to use and award his favorite actors. Young's absence said more than words could. The split has never been fixed to this day. Young keeps talking about Spielberg as one of the powerful guys in Hollywood who put a ban on her work. Spielberg, on the other hand, kept going and barely ever mentioned her name. They didn't end their fight with scuffles or public problems. At the end there was something colder, eraser. Even though Young was very good at what she did, and very intense, Spielberg refused to work with her again. And in Hollywood, being quiet can be the worst punishment of all. That brings us to number 6, Marlon Brando. Spielberg's success was built on hard work. Every shot, frame and movement of the camera was planned with great attention to detail. He saw making films as a careful balance, structure to back up big ideas. Brando, on the other hand, liked chaos. He was the crazy genius of Hollywood, and he treated every part like a personal test. Brando wanted freedom, while Spielberg wanted to be in charge. And when their worlds finally met, they were never really going to work together. It was always going to break. The match looked too good to pass up on paper. Spielberg, the renegade who changed the way Hollywood made films in the 1970s. And Brando, the live embodiment of modern acting brilliance. A lot of people thought it was a match made in heaven, but people who were there say the truth came out almost right away. Later, producer Kathleen Kennedy said, "Brando worked with his own creative logic that didn't take into account the realities of production." Spielberg thought Brando was brilliant, but he couldn't or wouldn't change his careful method to fit the chaos that Brando brought to every set. Steven Spielberg and Marlon Brando's relationship broke down during their first talks to work on projects together. Brando fought hard for writing control and insisted on being able to make up big dramatic scenes on the spot. Spielberg carefully planned out every part of the story, from where the characters would stand to how the cameras would be set up. He saw these requests as a direct threat to his vision. Later he told her privately, "You can't build a movie around doubt. Not on this scale." But Brando didn't care. He never cared about budgets or plans when making films. It had to do with finding the truth. Many people think that what he said to a friend was an insult to Spielberg. Some people make films like clockmakers. "I'd rather break the clock and see what happens." They didn't get along at all, and whole projects fell apart before they even started. Spielberg respected Brando's groundbreaking performances, but he told no one that he couldn't direct him. Spielberg, on the other hand, was seen by Brando as part of the Hollywood machine. Directors who care more about making money than about the messiness of art. What made the clash so sad was the chance that it never came together. Brando's new way of working with characters might have worked well with Spielberg's technical skill. They might have made something truly historic when they worked together. Instead, their ideas drove each other crazy. There were no films or second chances. There were only failed attempts and stories of meetings that finished without a decision. In Hollywood, other tensions finally went away, but this one stayed the same. Spielberg was polite and kept praising Brando's talent while also pointing out how tough he could be. Brando, who died in 2004, never changed either. He was still skeptical of the movie system that Spielberg helped create. Today their relationship isn't known as a nasty fight, but as a missed chance to see two movie giants who had very different ideas about what films should be like clash. Spielberg, who was good at controlling things, and Brando, who was good at predicting chaos, didn't work together. Instead, they left only quiet. In a bigger sense, these stories show that even a famous director like Steven Spielberg can have problems. Behind the perfect hits and timeless classics are stories of egos clashing, creative disagreements, and personalities that just couldn't get along. Spielberg always drew a line. Whether it was because of politics, work, or just plain chaos, there was no turning back once that line was passed. Ryan O'Neal comes in at number 5. O'Neal and Spielberg's story isn't about a movie they made together like the others on this list. Instead, it's about a movie that never happened. The match looked great on paper. Ryan O'Neal was a big star in the 1970s because of films like Love Story and Paper Moon. Steven Spielberg, a young director who is becoming famous very quickly, is looking for leading guys to carry out his big projects. Their paths met for a short time, but the cracks were clear as soon as they sat down together. O'Neal acted like a classic Hollywood star and expected his directors to change things, work on the plot, and treat him differently. Spielberg, on the other hand, was going in a different direction. He believed in working together and treated everyone on set with the same amount of care, from the main actors to the extras in the background. He expected him to be humble in return. Afterward, Norman Reynolds, a production director, summed it up. Steven wasn't picky with anyone. That fight was clear from the start. The meetings became heated. O'Neal wanted changes to be made to the script and the plan, and he even questioned Spielberg's choices as a director. This wasn't just a bother for Spielberg, who valued trust and efficiency. It went against everything he thought filmmaking stood for: working together. Even worse, O'Neal is said to have said inappropriate things about other cast members at events for the business. Spielberg thought that was not only unprofessional but also betrayal, because to him trust was very important. It was too late to fix what was broken. As usual, Spielberg never said anything bad about O'Neal in public. He didn't do that. But what he did and how he acted spoke for him. Even though O'Neal was famous, Spielberg quietly moved on, ending any chance of working with him again. But O'Neal didn't hold back. Friends said he thought Spielberg was too precious and self-important, and that the director's way of working with others was just micromanaging. For O'Neal, Spielberg's way of doing things was too tight. Spielberg thought O'Neal's ego was dangerous and the damage would last forever. Other stars from O'Neal's time spent a long time in Spielberg's world, but O'Neal never did. His reputation for being tough, along with Spielberg's refusal to put up with star arrogance, made the breakup permanent. They never got along again. He then moved on to making films with players who did well on his structured, disciplined sets. In the meantime, O'Neal saw how the 1980s changed Hollywood, but this time he wasn't in Spielberg's circle. Their friendship is still a what-if and a clash of two different Hollywood eras. One is based on old-school star power, and the other is based on a new way of thinking about making movies together. Fourth place goes to Robert Duvall. When directors and actors fight in Hollywood, it's generally over creative decisions. There are differences in style, vision, and how to handle the stress of a big show. And Steven Spielberg and Robert Duvall didn't fight over a part or a movie set. It had to do with politics. Before Spielberg, 2002 was meant to be a friendly act between different cultures. As part of a US-approved culture exchange, he went to Havana and showed 8 of his films to thousands of Cubans. He went to see the Jewish community in Havana, paid his respects at the city's Holocaust Memorial, and even met with US officials. But it wasn't about negotiation in the news. They were only about one meeting. Spielberg needs to talk to Fidel Castro. One of the most recognized actors in the United States, Ed Duvall, didn't keep quiet on 60 Minutes too. He went for the throat right away. Spielberg makes films about freedom and democracy, so how could he meet with a tyrant like that? The snark then came out. Would you think about adding a small room to the Holocaust Museum or somewhere across the street to honor the Cubans Castro killed? It wasn't just criticism either. It was a clear statement of guilt, and Duvall made sure everyone heard it. He is being very cocky by going there. It's not important to me to work at DreamWorks, but I'll never do it again. Spielberg, caught off guard, carefully considered what to say. A spokesman made it clear that the trip was cultural, not political, and that he was going to Cuba to share his films and ideals with the people there. The statement said Duvall had lied about him, and that the visit had been legal and allowed by the US government as a cultural exchange. However, the damage had already been done. Duvall's words changed how people saw Spielberg. They saw him not as a filmmaker trying to do good, but as a man getting close to a tyrant. And in America after 9/11, when George W. Bush made the policy towards Cuba stricter, it looked terrible. And people who worked on the project say Spielberg was very upset behind the scenes. From The Godfather to Apocalypse Now, he had long admired Duvall's body of work and had even thought that he would be a great fit for work at DreamWorks. Steven Spielberg quietly shut the door after the public attack. There was no way to work together with Robert Duvall, and Duvall never gave in. In talks years later he said even more, "It's not making sense to me. It was a bad idea for Spielberg to go there." Always, Duvall, this wasn't about art. It was a matter of conviction. Unlike Spielberg's early problems with Julia Roberts or Robert Shaw, this one didn't go away when the cameras stopped running. This was deeply ideological and unacceptable. So the story was over before it even started. There was no work between Spielberg and Duvall. There were no working together, or making peace, just quiet. Even now their paths are still very different. Spielberg keeps proving that he is one of the best writers in movie history. Duvall, who is now in his 90s, is still very public, and not afraid to criticize things he thinks are wrong.